She towered over the Belmont paddock, 16 hands and 2 inches high, jet black and muscled like a colt. She was so powerful that veteran trainers actually checked under her belly in disbelief. Could a filly really look like this? Her name was Ruffian. She didn't just threaten the boys' club, she demolished it, breaking records and rewriting racing tradition before she was even 3. But that kind of glory came from genetics as risky as they were extraordinary. The real story begins long before her first race, when a single breeding decision created a filly, both unbeatable and fatally fragile. What made Ruffian possible? The answer is stranger and darker than anyone in racing was ready to admit. Ruffian's story began with a gamble in the breeding shed. Her sire Reviewer dazzled on the track with rare brilliance, winning 7 of his 11 starts and flashing the kind of speed that made breeders dream of greatness. But his body was a contradiction. 3 times he broke down, each injury more devastating than the last. A bowed tendon, a fractured sesamoid, the kind of breakdowns that end most careers after one. Reviewer kept coming back only to shatter again. His speed was real, but his legs were glass. On the other side stood Shenanigans, Ruffian's dam. She was everything Reviewer was not. A rugged, durable sprinter, Shenanigans raced 22 times, winning 7, and placed in a dozen more. Her legs held up through hard campaigns, her body built for work, not just for show. Where Reviewer was a comet, brilliant but fleeting, Shenanigans was a survivor. Her races did not make headlines, but her toughness was legendary among horsemen. The Janney family, owners of both, rolled the dice. They hoped for a foal with Shenanigans' legs and Reviewer's heart. The odds of striking that balance were slim. Breeding in thoroughbreds is a lottery, and sometimes the ticket pays out in ways no one expects. What arrived at Claiborne Farm in the spring of 1972 was a filly who inherited Reviewer's explosive speed and his fragility, all packed inside a frame that seemed almost too powerful for its own good. The Janneys got a racehorse who would push the boundaries of what a filly could do, but they also got the risk, the possibility that her body, like her sire's, might not be able to handle the force she could generate. Long before Ruffian stepped onto a racetrack, her fate was already written in her bones. The tension between brilliance and fragility would define every decision made about her training, every hope and every fear that followed her into the starting gate. At just a few months old, Ruffian was already rewriting the rules of the pasture. She towered over the other foals, her jet-black coat making her easy to spot and even easier to fear. Most weanlings jockey for a place at the feed trough, but Ruffian did not need to. She ate first, drank first, and claimed the best patches of grass without challenge. The colts, usually the rowdiest of any young herd, gave way to her bulk and her attitude. Farm manager Chick Lang remembered her as the queen of the field, a filly who set the tone from her first day outside. If another foal tried to cut in line, Ruffian would lower her head and push them aside, sometimes with a playful nip, sometimes with a shove that left no doubt. Her size was more than a curiosity, it was a warning. By 6 months, she looked like a yearling, her legs too long, her chest too wide, her stride already stretching farther than the others could manage. She moved with a kind of authority, as if she knew she was built for something more than just pasture games. The grooms at Potomac Farm joked that she was running her own private school out there, teaching the colts who was in charge. These early months set a pattern no one could ignore. Where most fillies might hang back or blend in, Ruffian took over. Her dominance was not just physical, it was psychological. She did not just want to win, she wanted everything. The farmhands watched her with a mix of awe and amusement, quietly betting among themselves that this filly would be trouble for anyone who tried to hold her back. Even then, before a saddle ever touched her back, Ruffian's competitive fire was impossible to miss. The pasture was her first racetrack, and she never let another horse get in front of her. Frank Whiteley Jr. was known as the Fox. but his caution bordered on obsession. At Belmont, he set up a narrow army cot right outside Ruffian's stall door, folding his wiry frame onto it night after night. He lay there with his boots still on, listening to the creaks and snorts of the barn, his eyes fixed on the sliver of light beneath her door. The backstretch at night was a different world, quiet but never truly at rest. Whiteley trusted no one with Ruffian, not even his own stable hands. The 1970s were thick with rumors of sabotage and doping, and Whiteley had seen too many good horses ruined by a careless moment or a stranger's hand. He kept a loaded flashlight and a battered thermos within reach, ready to spring up at any sound. Veterinarians and grooms who worked the circuit remember his routine. Dr. Arthur Giacalone, the barn vet, would sometimes find Whiteley awake at 3 in the morning, pacing the aisle or checking Ruffian's legs by feel, not just by sight. Whiteley rarely left the barn for more than a few hours. If he did, a trusted groom would take his place, but even then he would return unannounced, checking for anything out of place, an unfamiliar footprint or a latch not set just so. He knew what he had in Ruffian, a once-in-a-generation horse, but also a target. The paranoia was not just for show. In the years after Secretariat's Triple Crown, racing became a high-stakes game. Whiteley remembered stories of needles slipped through stall bars, of horses spooked or poisoned on the eve of a big race. He was not about to let Ruffian become a headline for the wrong reason. So he slept on that cot, night after night, the scent of hay and liniment thick in the air, listening for trouble. In those hours before dawn, with only the hum of the barn fans and the shifting weight of a restless filly for company, Whiteley's vigilance bordered on devotion. He had sacrificed comfort and sleep for a chance to protect greatness, knowing that with every precaution, he was gambling against fate. Before sunrise, the barns at Belmont Park filled with the low hum of anticipation. At 5:30 in the morning, while the city's lights still flickered in the distance, Ruffian's training began. Frank Whiteley led her out before the sun, shrouding her workouts in secrecy. He wasn't just hiding from prying eyes, he was dodging the clockers, the unofficial timers who haunted the rail with stopwatches, hungry for any hint of a superstar in the making. In the world of New York racing, word traveled fast. If a horse worked too quickly, the odds would shift, the whispers would start, and every rival would circle closer. But in the dark, only sound betrayed her. Grooms and stable hands, men who'd spent their lives around horses, stood silent as Ruffian thundered past. Her hoofbeats didn't tap or patter. They landed with a deep, rolling rhythm, thud, 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 heavy as a freight train picking up speed. It was a sound that didn't belong to a filly or even most colts. It was raw, physical power, echoing off the damp track and into the chests of anyone close enough to feel it. The grooms would nudge each other, grinning, as if in on a secret no one else could guess. They'd heard plenty of good horses work in the dark, but none like this. Confidence grew with every morning. The stable hands, who earned barely more than $100 a week, started pooling their wages for something they had never done before, betting it all on a 2-year-old filly's debut. It wasn't bravado. It was faith built on sound, on the way she moved through the shadows, on the certainty that whatever Ruffian was, she was different. By the time she cooled out and the sun crept over the barn roof, the backstretch was already buzzing. The rest of the racing world had no idea what was coming, but the men who listened to her in the dark were sure. Free money was about to walk into the daylight. May 22, 1974, at Belmont Park. The gates sprang open on a 5.5-furlong maiden race, and Ruffian exploded from post 9 with such force that Jacinto Vasquez, a seasoned jockey, lurched forward in the irons, fighting to keep his seat. She straightened herself almost instantly, her ears pinned and her legs already eating up the track. For the first few strides, the rest of the field might as well have been standing still. Spectators in the grandstand saw a jet black blur, but on the slow-motion replay, something different emerged. Most horses run with a rotary gallop, a compact circular stride that churns the ground beneath them. Ruffian's stride was something else entirely. Each extension reached farther than the last, her front legs stretching out with the reach of a sprinter, her hindquarters driving with the force of a freight train. Biomechanics experts would later measure her stride at nearly 28 feet, a length reserved for the rarest of thoroughbreds. She did not look like she was running fast. She looked like she was floating, barely touching the dirt, devouring ground with a kind of effortless violence. By the far turn, Vasquez was sitting still, hands motionless, letting her roll. He never asked for more. He never had to. Ruffian opened up daylight. Then daylight became a chasm. 15 lengths at the wire, no urging, no whip, just the natural power of a filly whose only limit was the finish line itself. The clock flashed 1 minute 3 seconds flat. She had tied the track record for 5.5 furlongs, a mark set by a colt, and she had done it in her very first start. Later that day, the colts ran the same distance and looked ordinary by comparison, clocking in a full second slower, a gap of 5 lengths in racing terms. On the chart, the numbers were stark: 15 lengths, 1 minute 3 seconds, hand ride. But the numbers did not capture the feeling in the paddock as trainers, grooms, and bettors realized what they had just witnessed. The stable hands who had pooled their wages for her debut cashed tickets worth more than a week's pay. Vasquez, climbing off in the winner's circle, could only shake his head. He said she rocketed out like a cannon, still wide-eyed. Ruffian had arrived, and with her, a new standard for what speed looked like, one that left the boys' club scrambling for answers. The Fashion Stakes brought a new challenger into Ruffian's path, a filly named Copernica, already a stakes winner and touted as the fastest of her crop. In any other year, Copernica would have been the headline. Trainers circled this matchup on their calendars, convinced that Ruffian had finally met her equal. But as the gates opened, Copernica's connections watched their hopes unravel, stride by stride. Copernica broke sharply, determined to test Ruffian early. For 2 furlongs, she clung to Ruffian's side, refusing to yield. Most fillies would have been content to hold position, but Copernica pressed the issue, her jockey asking for everything before they had even reached the turn. The duel lasted less than a quarter mile. Ruffian's ears flicked back, her stride lengthened, and she responded with the same cold efficiency that had ruled the pasture as a weanling. She didn't just pull away, she opened up daylight in a matter of seconds. By the time they straightened for home, Copernica was 7 lengths behind, her challenge broken, her will spent. The rest of the field disappeared into the haze. The clock told the rest of the story. Ruffian stopped the timer in 1 minute, 2 4/5 seconds for 5.5 furlongs, a new stakes record, and a time that left trainers and turf riders thumbing through old charts searching for any precedent. No 2-year-old filly had ever run that fast at Belmont, not in living memory. The official chart listed Ruffian as ridden out, but the margin, 7 lengths, barely captured the psychological gap she had opened. Copernica, so promising on paper, finished a distant second and never threatened again. Observers in the paddock talked about Ruffian's killer instinct. She didn't just want to win, she refused to let another horse even look her in the eye. Whenever a rival drew close, Ruffian found another gear, as if some internal switch flipped from cruise control to full throttle. For jockey Jacinto Vasquez, the challenge wasn't getting her to run, but figuring out how to keep her within the bounds of reason. The Fashion Stakes made that clear. The only thing capable of stopping Ruffian was the finish line itself. The numbers from that afternoon went up on the board and sent ripples through the racing world. A 7-length victory, a stakes record of 1 minute, 2 4/5 seconds. The data didn't just suggest dominance, they made it undeniable. The so-called boys' club had a new member, and she was rewriting the record books with every stride. In the Astoria Stakes, unease crept in, not for the competition, but for the man holding the reins. Jacinto Vasquez had already steered Ruffian to 2 effortless victories, but as he climbed aboard for her 3rd start, the pressure felt different. The field was strong, but the real question was not who would finish second. It was whether anyone could keep up with her at all. Ruffian broke cleanly and settled into her stride, and by the first furlong, the outcome was never in doubt. She widened her lead with every stride, the gap stretching to 9 lengths before Vasquez even considered asking for more. But he never did. Instead, he fought the urge to let her run. He tightened his grip on the reins, holding her back, fighting her natural pull to go faster. The lead grew almost effortlessly. After the race, Vasquez did not bother with bravado. Reporters crowded around, searching for new superlatives, and he offered only honesty. He admitted that she might take off and never stop, the words clipped and serious. He had spent the entire race trying to slow her down, afraid that if he let her run full out there would be no catching her, not by the field, not by anyone. The margin at the wire was officially 9 lengths, but the real story was what had not been seen, a filly running with the brakes on and still demolishing her peers. That confession reverberated through the press box and the backstretch. Trainers and owners whispered about the implications. If Ruffian was breaking records under restraint, what would happen if she was ever let loose? The old excuse that fillies mature early and the colts will catch up was starting to sound hollow. Turf writers who had dismissed her dominance as a fluke began to hedge their bets. The numbers kept climbing, and so did the anxiety. Each race was supposed to reveal her limits. Instead, it only revealed the limits of everyone else. By the end of July, the industry was restless. The boys' club, so confident in its old logic, found itself searching for new explanations. Ruffian was not just winning, she was making the very idea of competition seem irrelevant. And for the first time, even her own jockey was wondering how much more she had in reserve and what it might cost to find out. Saratoga Racecourse has a reputation for swallowing legends. Sports writers call it the graveyard of champions, a place where sure things go to lose. On August 23, 1974, Ruffian stepped onto that ancient dirt for the Spinaway Stakes. The crowd expected a contest. What they got instead was a spectacle. The break was clean, and by the first call, Ruffian already had daylight. Her stride stretched longer with each bound, the black filly's legs reaching for the far turn while her rivals struggled to keep her in sight. Laughing Bridge, a well-regarded filly in her own right, tried to make a race of it. She was gone by the half-mile pole, left behind like the others. Ruffian never flicked an ear, never needed urging. At the top of the stretch, the margin kept growing, and by the wire, the chart called it 13 lengths. The official time set a new stakes record. In the winner's circle, there was no sign of fatigue, only a filly who looked like she could do it all over again. Saratoga's curse had claimed champions for decades, but Ruffian made the place look ordinary. The numbers on the board, 13 lengths and a stakes record, did more than impress. They demanded a new comparison. In press boxes and betting parlors, the talk turned from fillies to fractions, from tradition to data. Ruffian wasn't just beating her own kind. She was running times that forced the sport to reconsider what a 2-year-old could do and who the real champion might be. Sports writers crowded the Saratoga press box, flipping through daily racing form charts and searching for a rational explanation. The numbers stared back, impossible to ignore. Ruffian's quarter-mile splits from the Spinaway Stakes were faster than anything the colts could muster, even faster than Foolish Pleasure, the undefeated champion considered the gold standard for 2-year-olds. Faster was an understatement. Each fraction told a story. Her opening quarter was clocked at 22 seconds and change, and her half-mile at 44 seconds and a tick, both sharper than the splits posted by Foolish Pleasure in his best efforts that summer. Story after story pointed the same way. By the final quarter, she was still accelerating, covering ground with a stride that left the stopwatch gasping to keep up. Accelerating described it best. Columnists who once leaned on the old logic that fillies mature early and colts catch up found their arguments falling apart in the face of these numbers. Arguments that had seemed solid began to crack. The data did not just suggest parity, it revealed a gap. Ruffian was running faster, And she was doing it with less effort, her ears pricked and her jockey still. The official charts printed her times in black and white, but the real drama played out in the margins and the fractions, where the myth of male superiority was quietly erased. Graphs in the racing form highlighted her splits, with lines for the colts lagging behind, each tick of the clock another blow to the old order. Graphs made it obvious. The boys' club had always trusted the clock to defend its boundaries. Now, the clock betrayed them. Ruffian was not just the fastest filly. She was the fastest 2-year-old in the country, and the data made it plain. The difference was not a fluke or a quirk of conditions. It was right there in the fractions, measured, recorded, undeniable. Undeniable. In the days after the Spinaway, Frank Whiteley's routine changed. The barn, once filled with the quiet confidence of an undefeated season, took on a new tension. Ruffian, who had never shown a hint of weakness on the track, came back from her morning walk stiff in her right hind leg. At first, the signs were subtle, a slight hesitation, a shift in weight that only a horseman like Whiteley would notice. But even the smallest irregularity in a horse built for speed could spell disaster. Whiteley called in his trusted veterinarian, Dr. Arthur Giacalone. The examination was methodical. There was no swelling, no heat, just a barely perceptible flinch when pressure was applied near her hock. In 1974, diagnostic tools were limited. X-rays offered only shadows and outlines, but the vet's hands were trained for nuance. After repeated checks, the verdict became clear. Ruffian had suffered a hairline stress fracture, an invisible crack in the bone, the kind that forms when force overwhelms structure. The torque from her immense stride, the same reach that left her rivals gasping, had pushed her young bones to their limit. For Whiteley, the decision was immediate. There would be no more races that year. She was shut down, her stall door closed to the press and the hopeful. 6 months of rest, no training, no gallops, not even a jog on the shed row. The barn fell silent. On the track, the talk shifted from her next conquest to the cost of such dominance. Grooms whispered about the curse of speed, the risk that every stride could be the one that snapped something vital. Whiteley moved through the barn with a new edge, double-checking every rap and poultice, haunted by the memory of her sire reviewer, whose own career had been a string of breakdowns. Veterinary science in the 1970s had no answer for the paradox of Ruffian's body. Her frame, built for power, delivered forces her bones could barely withstand. Each stride sent shock waves up her legs, thousands of pounds of pressure concentrated on ankles and hocks. Modern biomechanics would later show that long-striding horses like Ruffian experience exponentially greater stress at top speed. In her case, the very trait that set her apart, her ability to cover ground with fewer, longer strides, meant that each impact landed with more force than her peers ever faced. The microfracture was not a fluke. It was the bill coming due for a summer of impossible performances. While Ruffian healed in her stall, the racing world turned its attention elsewhere. The Kentucky Derby loomed in the spring, and a new name took center stage: Foolish Pleasure, the undefeated colt who swept through the prep races and claimed the roses at Churchill Downs. Headlines dubbed him the King. But in every conversation, there was an asterisk, a reminder that the Queen was waiting in the wings, her return uncertain, but her legend growing in absence. The narrative shifted from what Ruffian had done to what she might do next. The layoff only heightened the suspense. Every day she spent out of sight, the myth grew larger. For Whiteley, the hiatus was agony. He watched other trainers parade their stars, knowing that the best horse in the country was standing idle, her future balanced on the fragile intersection of genetics and hope. The barn clock ticked through the long winter, each day a test of patience and faith. Ruffian's healing was slow, but every step forward was measured, deliberate. There would be no shortcuts, no gambles with her future. The world would have to wait. The Queen was not finished yet. April 1975. The barn doors opened and Ruffian stepped back onto the track, her body transformed by 6 months of careful rest and slow, deliberate work. She stood nearly 16.2 hands at the withers, taller than most colts, with muscle packed onto her frame in a way that defied every expectation for a filly. Her coat was still jet black, her stride still impossibly long, but there was a new breadth to her chest, a depth to her barrel. Grooms who had watched her grow from a bullying weanling now found themselves looking up at her, measuring her against memories of champions past, and finding the scale tipped in her favor. The Acorn Stakes at Aqueduct marked her return to competition. 7 fillies loaded into the gate, but only one mattered. Ruffian broke 5th, as if giving her rivals a head start for the sake of drama. Within seconds, she surged to the front, her ears flicking back and forth, her stride stretching out as if the months away had only sharpened her hunger. By the far turn, the others were already fighting for second. Ruffian drew away without so much as a shake of the reins, crossing the wire 8 1/4 lengths in front. The crowd, more than 33,000 strong, erupted, not just for the margin, but for the ease, the sense that she was still holding something in reserve. 3 weeks later came the Mother Goose Stakes at Belmont. The field was smaller, the distance longer, 1 mile and 1/8, but the script never changed. Ruffian went straight to the lead, never allowed a challenge, and widened her advantage with each stride. Her splits were relentless, the kind that left trainers in the paddock staring at their stopwatches, shaking their heads. She ran as if the others were invisible, as if the only competition was the clock and her own limits. She crossed the finish line alone, the margin wide enough to make the official numbers feel almost beside the point. The stakes record fell. The last jewel of the Triple Tiara was the Coaching Club American Oaks, 1.5 miles, the true test of stamina. For the first time, the field pressed her early, trying to force a mistake, to find a weakness in the filly who had never trailed a single step in her life. Ruffian opened up 6 lengths on the backstretch, her stride smooth and unhurried. But as they turned for home, the gap closed. For a brief moment, Equal Change, a talented rival, drew within a length. Ruffian's ears pricked, and she pulled away again, almost as if she had been waiting for company. She crossed the wire 2 3/4 lengths ahead, her closest finish yet, but even that margin came with her jockey easing up, letting her coast through the final yards. Some said she was bored, waiting for a challenge that never truly came. Through all 3 races, Ruffian led at every call. She had never seen another horse's tail, not in 10 starts. The statistics told a story even her rivals could not deny. Undefeated, 10 for 10, winner of the Triple Tiara by a combined margin that belonged to another era. She set or equaled stakes records in every major test. Yet beneath the awe, there was always an undercurrent of anxiety. Her body, so powerful and so finely tuned, still carried the shadow of her sire's fragility. Every race was a balancing act between brilliance and risk, between the spectacle of dominance and the knowledge that nothing so perfect is ever truly safe. For now, the Queen reigned, her legend growing with every stride, the boundaries of what a filly could do rewritten in black and white on the racing charts. In 1975, America demanded a showdown. Could a 2-year-old filly truly destroy the boys' club on racing's biggest stage? 50,000 fans and 20 million viewers would witness a spectacle fueled by feminist momentum and a $265,000 wager. But behind the hype, her own trainer warned, she doesn't know how to lose. She will kill herself trying to win. What really set the tragedy in motion, and could anyone have stopped it? By the summer of 1975, America's appetite for a spectacle was ravenous. The country had watched Billie Jean King topple Bobby Riggs in tennis 2 years earlier, and the phrase "girl beats boy" echoed in headlines, talk shows, and even at racetracks. Feminist momentum was everywhere, on bumper stickers, in newspaper cartoons, and in the voices of women who had grown up believing the winner's circle was for someone else. It was not just sports writers who wanted another battle of the sexes. Toll booth workers handed out buttons that said, "I'm for her" to drivers headed for Belmont Park. Radio hosts debated whether a filly could take down the Derby-winning colt. The story was irresistible. Ruffian, undefeated in 10 starts, had already swept the filly Triple Crown. There simply was not a filly left who could challenge her. The only way to keep the public's attention and the money flowing was to pit her against the best of the boys. In boardrooms and back offices, owners and promoters saw opportunity. The New York Racing Association paid Master Derby's owners $50,000 just to keep their Preakness winner out of the race, clearing the way for a clean two-horse showdown. Ogden Phipps, Ruffian's owner, and Stuart Janney III, who owned Foolish Pleasure, agreed to the terms. Both horses would carry 121 pounds, and the distance would be 1¼ miles at Belmont Park. The purse reached $265,000, but the real windfall was the national broadcast. CBS was set to beam the match race into 20 million homes, with sponsorships and betting handle expected to soar into the millions. The pressure on the horsemen was relentless. Newspapers ran daily polls asking, "Which horse are you backing?" while sports columnists wrote about Ruffian as a symbol of the new era. Feminist leaders gave interviews about what her victory would mean. The match became more than a race. It was a referendum on progress, pride, and the possibility of rewriting history. Yet behind the scenes, not everyone was convinced this was a good idea. Ruffian's trainer, Frank Whiteley, had spent decades in the business. He knew that match races were dangerous. There was no pack to settle behind, no chance to rate the pace. The horses would be forced to run flat out from the gate, each one desperate to seize the lead and hold it at all costs. Whiteley's warnings made their way into the press, but the momentum was unstoppable. The public wanted a champion who could shatter old assumptions, and the owners wanted the glory that came with making history. The match was set, and there was no turning back. The contract was signed in a haze of flashbulbs and backroom deals. Both horses would carry 121 pounds, the same weight, across 1¼ miles of Belmont's vast oval. The purse stood at $265,000, but the real prize was the spotlight. CBS had secured the broadcast rights, and sponsors lined up, eager to be part of the moment. Behind the scenes, the negotiations were anything but simple. The New York Racing Association had already paid Master Derby's owners $50,000 to step aside, clearing the field for a head-to-head showdown. Every detail was hammered out in meeting rooms thick with cigar smoke and ambition. The date, the distance, the weights, each agreed upon not for fairness, but for maximum drama. Frank Whiteley, Ruffian's trainer, sat through the meetings with a quiet dread. He had trained champions, seen the toll that ambition could take on horse and human alike. Match races, he knew, were a different animal. In a normal field, a horse could settle behind the leaders and wait for the right moment. In a match race, there was no pack, no tactical breathing room. Two horses, side by side, forced to run at breakneck speed from the moment the gates opened. Whiteley told reporters, "She doesn't know how to lose. She will kill herself trying to win." He had tried to delay, to convince the owners to wait until Ruffian was older and stronger. But the momentum was too strong. Money, television, and the promise of history swept aside his warnings. The pressure on Whiteley was immense. Ogden Phipps and Stuart Janney III, men used to getting their way, wanted their horses on the national stage. The Racing Association wanted a spectacle that would fill the grandstands and electrify the betting windows. CBS wanted ratings, not caution. Whiteley's protestations landed like pebbles in a river. The deal was done. The rules were set. On July 6, 1975, Ruffian and Foolish Pleasure would meet under the most unforgiving conditions the sport could devise. In private, Whiteley worried about more than just defeat. He understood what would be demanded of Ruffian. In a two-horse race, the only way to win is to lead, every stride, every second. That meant a pace faster than any she had ever been forced to run, with no chance to relax, no margin for error. The industry's hunger for a girl beats boy moment had created a setup that left no room for mercy or restraint. The match was cast as a battle of equals, but the terms were stacked for spectacle, not safety. Whiteley could only hope that his filly's heart, the very thing that made her great, would not be the thing that destroyed her. On July 6, 1975, Belmont Park became the epicenter of American sports. 50,000 people pressed against the rail, spilling through the grandstand and onto the infield, each one holding a ticket to history. The roar of the crowd rolled over the track, a living wave of anticipation. In living rooms across the country, 20 million viewers tuned in to CBS, their televisions flickering with the promise of a showdown that had already outgrown the boundaries of horse racing. Newspapers had compared it to Ali and Frazier, to the Super Bowl, to Billie Jean King's night under the Astrodome lights. The air was thick with the sense that something irreversible was about to happen. The media could not get enough. Reporters crowded the paddock, calling out questions to anyone in earshot. Columnists argued over whether a filly could really outrun a Kentucky Derby champion, while radio hosts spun tales of destiny and defiance. The storylines multiplied. The undefeated queen of the fillies, the iron-willed Derby winner, the trainers and owners who had staked reputations and fortunes on the outcome. Every detail was magnified, every rumor given oxygen. One rumor in particular took on a life of its own before the race had even begun. Some said that Ruffian, the black-coated filly with the white blaze, was spooked by a flock of birds on the infield. It is a story that would echo for decades, repeated in newspaper columns and whispered at racetracks. The truth, though, is far less sensational. Yes, there were birds. There are always birds at Belmont. But they were a backdrop, not a trigger. Veterinary experts and race officials would later confirm that nothing in the infield startled her. The real danger was built into the match itself. 2 horses, no pack, forced to run at full throttle from the moment the gates flew open. The tension was electric as the horses entered the starting gate. Photographers jostled for position. The click of shutters was almost lost in the rising din. Spectators leaned forward, some clutching "I'm for her" buttons, others waving betting slips. The horses stood locked in their stalls, muscles coiled, waiting for the bell. No one in the crowd could have known what would unfold in the next 2 minutes. But in that instant, with the world watching, the scale of the spectacle was undeniable. A single race had become a referendum on possibility, on whether the old order could be overturned by a black filly with a heart that refused to yield. The bell rang, and the gates snapped open. Ruffian lunged forward, explosive as ever, but her right shoulder clipped the metal post on her way out. The impact was sharp enough to jolt her stride, but she recovered in a heartbeat, muscles firing, head stretching for daylight. Foolish Pleasure broke just as fast, matching her step for step, 2 champions locked together, neither willing to yield an inch. In that first frantic burst, the race's true danger revealed itself. There was no pack to settle behind, no tactical pause, just a straight line of raw velocity and pride. The clock told a story of its own. The first quarter mile flashed by in 22 1/5 seconds, a split that belonged to sprinters, not horses set to run a mile and a quarter. For context, that pace would have been blistering in a 6-furlong dash. Here, it was unsustainable, a mechanical gamble that loaded every joint and tendon with stress. Ruffian's stride, usually so fluid, now hammered the track with the urgency of a horse who had never been behind, who did not know how to run any other way. Foolish Pleasure pressed her from the outside, forcing her to keep that impossible tempo. Each time Ruffian's hooves hit the dirt, she was absorbing forces 2 to 3 times her own weight, over 1,000 pounds magnified by speed and willpower. Stride analysis from the timing charts shows how quickly the margin for error vanished. At full gallop, Ruffian's legs cycled at nearly 4 strides per second. In those first 22 seconds, her body was already flirting with the threshold of what bone and ligament could withstand. The gate hit had forced a subtle correction, but with Foolish Pleasure glued to her flank, there was no chance to settle, no time to find her rhythm. She was running not just against a colt, but against the physical limits of her own anatomy. By the time they reached the far turn, both horses had covered the opening quarter at a pace that defied the logic of distance racing. The crowd's roar blurred into background noise. Every eye was on the 2 dark shapes tearing down the backstretch, locked together, neither giving way. The numbers on the stopwatch and the pounding of Ruffian's stride set the stage for what was coming. Relentless pressure and a race that was already pushing the boundaries of what a thoroughbred could endure. Stride for stride, Ruffian and Foolish Pleasure thundered down Belmont's backstretch, neither giving an inch. The crowd's roar faded into a distant hum as the two horses locked into a duel that belonged more to physics than to sport. Each hoofbeat landed with the force of a sledgehammer, the dirt flying in rhythmic bursts, 4 strides every second, each one a test of tendon and will. They ran so close that the air between them seemed to vanish, the space filled by muscle, sweat, and the stubborn refusal to yield. Ruffian's ears flicked back, catching the sound of Foolish Pleasure's nostrils flaring beside her. Her stride lengthened, gathering power from deep in her chest. She edged her nose in front, then a half length, then back to a nose, never letting the colt get by. This was her territory, out front, dictating the terms, daring anyone to challenge her. For 3 furlongs, neither horse blinked. The stopwatch ticked off fractions that belonged to a sprint, not the marathon distance ahead. 22 1/5 seconds for the opening quarter, and the pace refused to slacken. Jacinto Vasquez, perched high in the saddle, felt the filly's power in his hands. He would later say she felt stronger than ever, more electric than in any race before. She switched leads with perfect timing, her legs moving in a sequence honed by 1,000 hours of training but now driven by something raw, instinct and pride and maybe even anger at the challenge beside her. Vasquez could sense every muscle firing, every breath drawn like a piston. There was no hesitation, only a relentless drive to stay ahead. Stride counts from the official charts showed just how little margin there was for error. At top speed, Ruffian's legs cycled nearly 4 times per second. In those early moments, she was already pushing the limits of what bone and ligament could endure. The gate hit had forced a minor correction, but Foolish Pleasure's presence at her shoulder left no time for recovery, no room to settle. The duel became a contest not just of speed, but of nerve, neither horse willing to break, neither jockey daring to ask for less. The grandstand blurred past as they approached the far turn. Ruffian's mane streamed behind her, the only sign of chaos in her otherwise controlled violence. Foolish Pleasure hung at her flank, his jockey urging for just a little more. But Ruffian refused to let him by. She was doing exactly what she had always done, refusing to lose, refusing to concede even a single stride. Vasquez's grip tightened. He could feel the filly's heart hammering beneath him, her body surging forward with every pulse. The track itself seemed to vibrate with their passage, the sound of hooves echoing off the grandstand and into the humid July air. The lead changed by inches, but never in spirit. Ruffian would not give it up. Somewhere in that blur of speed and muscle, the pressure reached its peak. The duel was no longer just a race, it was a test of limits. How fast, how hard, how far a horse could go before something had to give. In those first 3 furlongs, the match became a battle of pure willpower, with the world watching and the finish line still impossibly far away. A sharp, unnatural sound cut through the humid air, louder than the thunder of hooves, sharper than the crowd's roar. It was the sound of bone, a crack like a pistol shot, echoing down the grandstand and across the infield at Belmont Park. For a split second, no one moved. The horses were still locked together, Ruffian's nose just in front, her stride as fierce as ever. But inside her right foreleg, both sesamoid bones had shattered at once. The suspensory ligament tore away, and her ankle collapsed. The hoof, now attached only by a strip of skin, flapped with each stride. Ruffian did not stop. She kept running, driven by instinct and the memory of the colt at her shoulder. The crowd, 50,000 strong, watched in disbelief as she surged on, her body refusing to yield to the injury. For nearly 50 yards, she ran on the stump of her leg, her eyes fixed ahead, her mind still in the race. Her jockey, Jacinto Vasquez, fought to pull her up, his hands desperate on the reins. He leaned his weight back, pleading with her to slow down, but Ruffian's will was stronger than the pain. Her stride faltered only when her leg could bear no more. The grandstand fell silent. The cheers and shouts that had filled the air just moments before vanished. replaced by a hush so deep it seemed to swallow the entire track. Even the television commentators struggled for words. Foolish Pleasure continued alone, his jockey easing him past the wire, but there was no celebration, no applause. The finish line had lost all meaning. Veterinarians rushed onto the track, their faces grim. In the seconds that followed, the scale of the injury became clear. The right front ankle was destroyed, bones pulverized, ligaments torn, the hoof swinging helplessly. A breakdown like this was not a simple accident of fate. It was the result of physics pushed past the breaking point. The blinding speed of the opening quarter mile, the relentless duel, the torque of 1,000 pounds slamming down on one fragile joint, all of it had converged in a single catastrophic instant. Frame-by-frame analysis of the race footage would later show the exact moment of failure. Ruffian's stride lengthened, her weight shifted, and the overloaded fetlock gave way. Veterinary experts explained that at such speeds, the forces on a thoroughbred's leg are immense, 2 to 3 times the horse's body weight with every stride. In a match race, there is no margin for error. There is only the drive to win, and the cost of that drive is measured in bone and blood. As the ambulance arrived, Ruffian stood trembling, her sides heaving, her eyes wide and uncomprehending. Vasquez, still in the saddle, wept openly, his silk streaked with dirt and sweat. Around them, the crowd remained silent, stunned by the suddenness, the brutality, and the finality of what they had witnessed. The contest was over. The crisis had begun. The ambulance doors swung open, and Ruffian was guided inside, her right foreleg suspended and her body trembling from shock. She stood barely as the van crawled toward the Belmont Park Clinic, every hoof step a test of her willpower and the limits of equine medicine. Around her, the silence was absolute. No cheers, no commentary, just the urgent voices of veterinarians and grooms moving with practiced speed. Inside the clinic, a team assembled, 4 veterinarians and an orthopedic surgeon, drawn from the best the track could offer. The lead surgeon, white coat streaked with sweat, called for instruments and x-rays. The damage was as severe as anyone had feared. Both sesamoid bones in the right ankle were shattered, the suspensory ligament torn away, the hoof attached by little more than skin. The team faced a challenge that pushed the limits of 1975 veterinary science. They worked for hours, hands steady and voices low. The plan was to save her not for racing, but for life itself. They fitted a heavy steel shoe to stabilize what was left of the hoof, anchoring it with a metal brace and surgical pins. Each step of the repair was a negotiation with anatomy, bone fragments aligned, ligaments sutured, blood vessels checked for flow. The goal was simple: give her a chance to stand, to heal, and maybe one day to become a broodmare. The surgery stretched on through the night, a marathon of hope and exhaustion. Anesthesia in 1975 was primitive by modern standards, and every hour under the gas increased the risk. The surgeons leaned over the table, sweat beading on their brows as they tightened the final screws and checked the brace for stability. The heavy steel hardware was their best answer to a catastrophe that defied easy solutions. By the time the last suture was tied, the team allowed themselves the smallest measure of hope. Ruffian's vital signs were steady. The leg, though grotesquely braced and pinned, was whole again, at least for now. The veterinarians prepared her for the hardest part, the recovery from anesthesia, a moment as perilous as the surgery itself. In the quiet of the clinic, the filly rested, suspended between the world she had known and the uncertain future that awaited her. The team could only watch and wait, their hands stained with effort, their faces drawn with fatigue, holding on to the fragile optimism that their work might have been enough. Around 2 a.m, Ruffian began to stir in the recovery stall. The anesthesia was wearing off, but the confusion was only beginning. In 1975, the science of bringing a horse out of surgery was crude. No recovery pools, no gentle immersion to keep panic at bay. All they could offer her was a padded floor and hope. Her last clear memory was the backstretch, the thunder of hooves, the colt at her flank. As the drugs faded, instinct took over. She tried to stand, legs flailing, mind still locked in the race. The heavy cast that held her shattered leg in place was no match for her strength or her confusion. She kicked and thrashed and, in a desperate effort to get up, tore the cast loose. The reconstructed right foreleg collapsed instantly. In the chaos, her healthy left leg took the full force of her panic. The elbow snapped clean. In a matter of seconds, hope unraveled into something irreversible. Veterinarians rushed to restrain her, but the damage had already been done. The room fell silent as the team assessed the new injury. 2 legs broken, one beyond repair, the other now destroyed. There was no way back, not in 1975, not with the tools and knowledge available. In modern equine hospitals, a horse in her condition would have been floated in a recovery pool, water supporting her weight, keeping her from thrashing and compounding the injury. Since her death, these pools have become standard, reducing catastrophic recovery injuries by nearly 90%. But on that night, there was only the stall, the cast, and the weight of decisions that could not be undone. The veterinarians faced a choice that no one wanted to make. They had spent hours fighting for her life, pushing the limits of what medicine could offer. Now, the only humane option was to end her suffering. The injection was given quietly. Ruffian, the undefeated filly, the one who never let another horse pass her, slipped away in the same place where she had fought so hard to win. The burden of that moment would linger with the team for years. They had done everything possible, but the era's technology had sealed her fate. The match had not beaten her. Her own will and the limits of the time had done what no rival ever could. Ruffian's body was returned to Belmont Park before dawn, the track still shrouded in the hush that had followed her final race. In the infield, not far from the finish line she had chased with every ounce of herself, a grave was prepared. Most racehorses, no matter how celebrated, are honored with a ritual that preserves only their head, heart, and hooves, symbols of intelligence, courage, and speed. For Ruffian, the tradition was set aside. She was buried whole, her body lowered gently into the earth as a single, unbroken form. It was an honor reserved for only the rarest of champions, a gesture that spoke to the depth of feeling she inspired in those who knew her and those who only knew her legend. Her grave was oriented with precision. Her nose was pointed toward the finish line, so that, if you believed in such things, she could always be seen as finishing the race. The caretakers and horsemen who gathered that morning understood the symbolism. For a sport that measures greatness in fractions of a second, the act of stopping time, of allowing her to rest forever in the shadow of the wire, was a final tribute. The infield at Belmont became more than a patch of grass. It turned into a place of pilgrimage for racing fans, for women who saw in Ruffian the proof that a filly could run with the best, and for those who believed that spirit could outlast even the most brutal of endings. The plaque that marks her grave is simple, but the choice to bury her whole body, heart, and soul ensured that her memory would not be divided, her legacy not reduced to pieces. In a sport built on ritual and hierarchy, Ruffian's burial was a rare, almost sacred break from the rules. She was given the ultimate respect, a place at the heart of Belmont, forever facing the finish she never lost. The morning after Ruffian's burial, the racing world faced a reckoning. Her death was not just a private heartbreak, it exposed a flaw in the system meant to protect its champions. Within months, veterinary conferences and industry meetings across the country echoed with a new urgency. The American Association of Equine Practitioners began to press for safer recovery protocols, citing Ruffian's case as the turning point. By the late 1970s, the first equine recovery pools appeared in the United States at New Bolton Center and other major clinics. These water tanks, designed to cradle a horse in weightlessness as it woke from anesthesia, cut the risk of catastrophic thrashing injuries by nearly 90%. Thousands of horses have survived surgery since, floating to consciousness instead of fighting on bare floors. Ruffian's tragedy became the catalyst for this quiet revolution in equine medicine. Yet numbers alone cannot capture the scale of her dominance. In 10 career starts, Ruffian never trailed another horse at any point. Not at the break, not at the wire, not even for a stride. Racing charts confirm it. Every call and every race she was in front. No colt, no filly, no champion of any era matched that record. She remains the only thoroughbred in history, male or female, to go undefeated without ever being headed. Her perfection demanded a new standard, and her loss demanded a new kind of care. The girl who never lost changed. More than the sport's record books, she changed the way the sport protects its bravest hearts. Every time a racehorse wakes safely in a recovery pool, Ruffian's legacy is at work, proof that even tragedy can force change. Her undefeated spirit still stalks the finish line, a reminder that history does not just honor the winners. It rewrites the rules. The boundaries she shattered still define what is possible, and every bold challenger owes her a debt. Her ghost runs on, and the boys' club can never close its doors again.